thanks for that, and thanks for having me along again. I recognise a few faces from last year. I think we were just having the conversation before that COVID had just started when I did March last year, and who would have thought that we'd be back here again still worrying about check-ins and spacing and sanitising. But life has a funny way of doing these things. So just to briefly introduce myself, I run a sort of an overarching company called Auto Services Group. It's a fairly generic term, but I run under a number of banners, and I'll talk about a bit about that in a minute. I used to be a school teacher, so originally I went teaching. Moved to Japan in 1999, and went over there as teaching English. And went to purchase a car, and the company that I went to purchase the car from said, look, you seem to know a little bit about cars, would you like to come and work for us? And thus began my journey. I actually came back and I kept teaching and was going to be a principal at one point, but the closer I got to being a principal, the less I enjoyed it. And I loved the cars, and I got to a point where the cars became, I was earning more from the cars than I was from the teaching, and I thought, this is ridiculous, I'll go and do what I love. So, and that's how it began. So that was in about 2007. But I have been doing it now for, I think, 22 years or thereabouts. So I've had a bit of practice at it now, and hopefully I can impart some of the of that experience to you tonight. Auto Services Group is the overarching company. Under that sits 3 different brands. Iron Chef Imports is the one that I get from, it's a rather unusual name, but it's based on my username that I used back in the days when we were talking on car forums, where my username was Iron Chef, and people used, because it made it easy for them to spot me with the business, I just tacked imports on the end, and that's how the name stuck. The other names came about as a result of attaching themselves to Iron Chef Imports. So Iron Lady, complete with Margaret Thatcher's head on there. That name was that's from the cars from the UK, obviously, and that came about over a few glasses of red. That idea for the name, and then Iron Block, which is American cars, so we do American cars as well. So that's how we began. The company, we have staff based. Certainly with Iron Chef, we have 2 staff based in Japan, and we have another 4 staff, here in Australia apart from me. So we do, our service is quite comprehensive, certainly in the Japanese space. In terms of how my business works, or the business works, we operate as a broker, so we're not really a dealer per se. When you come to us, you would be buying a service, and the service is we provide everything from, we have our own staff on the ground in Japan finding the cars for you, we book the cars on the boat for you, we get it cleared at this end, we could put it through the Australian compliance process, and then we put it on the road. So basically, we charge a flat fee. It doesn't matter whether you're spending $500,000 or $5,000, our fee is the same because the service is the same, all right? So we're not a dealer. So a dealer provides a car. A dealer will make a margin. Our margin is effectively our broker fee. We have that's a set fee, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later if you want to know how the process works. You can look it up on Iron Chef Imports anyway. I also belong to. I'm the deputy president of AEVA, which is quite a lengthy acronym. But it's an industry association based on imported motor vehicles, and we have been spending a lot of time, even just in the last couple of weeks. We went 2 weeks ago to meet with the Deputy Prime Minister's office, because the changes to the legislation for imported vehicles fall under his portfolio. So we were chatting to him. And we've had a couple of interesting conversations just in terms of there are some major changes happening. I'll go through those in a minute. Now you will notice, though, for those of you that were here last year, the PowerPoint looks quite similar. So, but I can add a few extra things on. So this is a 2021 update. So you can have a read through that. That'll just give you an idea of the process that's led us up to, certainly up to 2020. The only things that I would add on to that is obviously we didn't know that COVID was going to happen. So that sort of threw a spanner in the works in a number of ways. The new legislation, which we're operating under an interim arrangement at the moment, so the new legislation, which allows a lot more hybrids and EVs to come in, was supposed to come in at the end of 2018, and basically, although the government said we weren't ready, it was actually the department that wasn't ready, and so they certainly on an IT scale, so they wanted to move to an all online system. And they weren't anywhere up to scratch with that, so they delayed it. But they now, by law, have to bring in the new legislation in the middle of the year. But what they came up with was, because we said, look, obviously this is disadvantaging our businesses, and they said, okay, we'll have some interim arrangements where we can bring in all the cars that would be eligible under the new legislation, but do it under the current legislation. So we're sort of on this hybrid arrangement at the moment. It has actually been quite interesting. It's been really good, particularly because the new regulations, which I was just telling you about last year, everything was all fresh and new. COVID came and we got absolutely walloped, but in a good way, not in a bad way. So what we found was that a lot of people were sitting at home not spending any money, so they thought, hey, I'll jump online and buy a car. So it was great for me. I was saying I think I've gone up. My sales are up 40% last year. So it's been quite a wild ride for us. The flip side is it meant that I couldn't tackle some of the jobs, and I'll tell you about that a bit later too, that I was hoping to get to. But nevertheless, lots of things have happened in the meantime. And so I'll just take you back to this again. This is legislation that allows us to bring in a lot of new vehicles, and that's literally they're the regulations. So it has to meet in order to classify as an environmental vehicle under the environmental category. First things first is it can't be sold in Australia. So if it's a variant, for example, a Tesla sell all their vehicles in Australia, so we can't bring those in. There are no variants sold overseas that aren't sold here. But if they're not sold, if the variant's not sold in Australia, then we have to jump through certain hoops to get to the right spot. But basically, if it has an electric motor, regardless of its arrangement, whether it's with an internal combustion engine, so we can do anything from a mild hybrid right through to a full EV. But basically, if they're not sold here in Australia, we can bring them in, makes them eligible. As you'll discover in a minute, making them eligible doesn't necessarily mean that they are financially viable, or commercially viable is probably a better way to put it. Particularly with newer cars, because newer cars, if you imagine you're buying a car that's just been sold at a dealer overseas, they've paid all the taxes on that, and then they have to send it to Australia, and then you pay tax on it again. So that does create it's what is known in the trade as arbitrage. I don't know if you know much about that, but it's to do with the exchange rates and how that affects and whether you can bring cars in cheaper or not. But yeah, so that being able to meet the eligibility criteria is really only half of the equation. The car's got to make good sense financially as well. And later on, Paul, I'll get you to come up and have a talk about your experience too, because Paul, you would have walked straight past the Leaf on the way in. That's actually an imported car from Japan, and Paul bought that car through our company, and it will be able to share his experiences if you want to ask him any questions. He likes to talk about it, thankfully, which is good because it saves me having to do a bit less talking with my two. Yeah, so you can see on that, it has to have an alternative propulsion other than internal combustion. You can probably see, for those of you that read ahead, there are a couple of things that they slipped in. One is that it has to meet the emissions have to be, or the CO2 output actually, has to be better or equal to the current standards for internal combustion cars. So you can imagine if you've got a very old hybrid and it's not environmentally friendly, you can imagine very early hybrids, or maybe a sports car or something like that that has quite high emissions, but is also a hybrid. They won't accept that. It has to be higher than, and I can tell you pretty much every hybrid beats the current standards anyway. But they've slipped that in because there are going to be some, as they tighten things in the future, they don't necessarily want old hybrids coming in if they're not as efficient as the new ones. And the last one down there, there is a category in Japan called a K car, KEI. They are a very small, like a micro car, and they slip that category in as well, because while they are not they're not hybrids for the most part, they are nevertheless very fuel efficient. So that was the theory behind that. They would so pretty much any K car can come into Australia. For those people that like, if you're just running around town and you want something that's very cheap on fuel. So I think we're up to, okay, so what I was going to do is I'm going to go back through, you remember last year I showed you a whole heap of pictures of vehicles that are now eligible under the scheme. I'm just going to give you a brief update on all the ones that we've done. So, and also whether they've been successful. There's sort of a bit of a 1 year check back in just to see how things are travelling over there. The Mercedes-Benz S400H is a hybrid, and that was never sold here in Australia. And it was interesting because this was the very first car that made it onto the list. And I can tell you that we've sold a number of these. They are plentiful in Japan. That's one of the things that appeals, because and they are very popular over here for use as limousines, so and chauffeured vehicles. So we've done quite a number of those, and I'll tell you a bit more about fleet later. That's a whole different, for my business at least. There are lots of opportunities there in the Uber market and that sort of thing as well, in the chauffeur market. But yeah, so they've been quite popular. Come in a lot cheaper than the local equivalents. Suzuki Swift, we still haven't done one of those yet. And again, what happens is that you can imagine that the differences between the costs are greater as the car cost increases. So if you've got a $100,000 car, there's going to be a much wider gap between the Australian cars and the overseas cars. When you get down into the cheaper cars like this, they don't, particularly because that's fairly new, they don't represent necessarily good value for money. So, and we struggle to bring them in at a price that's equivalent to the Australian model. So, and all things being equal, no one's going to choose an imported vehicle over an Australian one with an Australian warranty and everything like that. So, yeah, so that's that we haven't done any of those yet. But I don't think, maybe someone's got a test car. Just to explain to you, the test car process, the workshops do the compliance to get the cars ready for Australian roads. They bring in a car as a test car, and then after that you can bring in as many as you like. I don't think anyone's gone through the test car process on this yet. And it's worth mentioning because the test car process can take a few months. It stretches the time out. But once you've got them on, the workshops have got them on their list, they're able to bring them in at will, which is great. We're doing plenty of these. Have you ever seen, they're an interesting looking thing. Have you ever seen, anyone seen an Alphard driving around on the roads? A lot of, there was a red one. I think it was a red one, passed straight past me before, just as I was heading. Yeah, there might be one out there. Yeah, these are a hybrid setup, a hybrid arrangement, 2.4, very similar arrangement, 2.4 litre from the you would have seen those in the Tarago, but also and in the Camry and a few other, but that and a hybrid motor, very popular, very expensive actually too, sort of 80,000-90,000, but very, very luxurious. And quite good for limousine type work. Gives you a bit more space. It's not the sort of thing that you might think of as a limousine, but you can imagine it's got a bit more space. And they actually do a 4-seater version, would you believe? And the back looks like first class in an airline. It's quite amazing. We have got one of these in, so the test car has arrived for this, the X-Trail Hybrid. I should mention too that while I've got the cars up here, they're from last year, there have been a lot of new ones added, so that you're going to see a few new extra cars in here. E400H is not particularly popular in Japan, and people would rather buy the S-Class than the E-Class because they're about the same money. So, all things considered, they'll buy the larger car because it's worth more money here. We haven't done any of those. The Prius we have done. So the Prius, that's the plug-in version. So we never got the plug-in version here. That's now on the list and ready to go, if that's of appeal to anyone. Again, another car that hasn't been of great appeal and not easy to find. The e-Golf, I'm not sure on that. I think someone has got a car here and doing the testing on it at the moment. But again, some of these just come down to the fact that it's far easier to get cars out of Japan than it is out of the UK. So there aren't many of these in Japan, but there are a number of them in the UK. But the process of finding the cars is not the logistics process is much smoother out of Japan than it is out of the UK. So hence why it'll take some time for some of these cars to get up to speed. But they are available now. Now, this one, I forgot to take a photo of this because we have got one here. It's a test car. I went to the workshop that I do a lot of work with in Sydney a few weeks ago, and I went around taking all the photos. I've substituted some of the photos in there just to show that they are real. But yes, we've got, so that's a Mazda 3 hybrid that we're now able to do. The CHR's on the list as well. That's coming up. There are a few people who've got those. Again, I'm not sure on the pricing on those. I'm not convinced that they'll be a good pricing model. Honda Diesel is the equivalent to an HRV. You'll know the HRV, but they do a hybrid in Japan. We have got one of those here, and that's done and ready to go. So if you like your small, small SUVs and you wanted a price on those, I'd have to check for you. I'm a little bit rusty on prices, so feel free to ask me afterwards, and I'll be able to. I can do some digging for you. Theoretically, yeah. No, I'd have to check. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Renault Zoe, unfortunately, they're a little bit overpriced. You'll know that prices here are pretty crazy.
Can you get the one with fast charging on it?
With these,
Yeah.
I'd have to have a look at that for you. I couldn't tell you. But again, this is just the reason these are a bit slow coming in is because they're coming out of the UK, not out of New Zealand, and everyone's still getting their network sorted out. There you go. That's a real photo.
Wow.
So that was a couple of my customers' cars were there. The E Plus and just the early regular ones we can do, but the E Pluses we can do up to any date. So so that's they've all started arriving now under the new scheme, which is really great. We're very excited about that. And that's the ZE0 is the one that Paul's got outside, and this is the ZE1, which is the current model. But yeah, they're all starting to arrive now, which is good. The i3 never made it onto the list. I left that on there just because I thought I'd show you, but unfortunately that didn't make the grade. Only because the criteria, it didn't meet the criteria. So I have to do a bit more homework on that, I think, if we want to get it on. I was quite hopeful that would end up on the list, but we haven't found enough differences yet to be able to make it work. I just have to do a bit more research. The Soul EV made it onto the list, but again, it's a UK car, so we're just some of those. I suspect a couple of workshops have probably bought test cars, but we haven't got to the point where we're selling them en masse yet. Now this one's really cool. I had a customer approach me last year who wanted a Nissan Note. Nissan Note is smaller than a Leaf. It's sort of micro a Micra size, Nissan Micra, if you know what size a Nissan Micra is. They do an e-power. The e-power setup is different in that it is a hybrid, but it's a hybrid. It's a plug-in hybrid, and the engine is set up only to charge the battery. So it's completely disconnected. It switches itself on and off as needed. The really cool thing about this one is it's a Nismo version, which is the sports. So you see it's got the whiz bang. I took a photo of the rear, but I was very excited to see this car the first time. It's the first time I've actually seen a Nismo version here in Australia. But that's there just in compliance at the moment. I just took a couple of photos of it. Just ignore the mark. It's just dirt. It's not. They're not scratches. But yeah, so that one's just arrived, and that's another one that's just been added to. That's a freshie that's just been added to the list of eligible cars now. He paid fairly good money for it, but he wanted the Nismo version, not just the regular. You can get a regular version, which is a lot cheaper. The Toyota Kluger hybrid was added to the list. It's the first generation hybrid Kluger, and I don't know why the person who did it put it on. It's one of those cars that I think won't. There were some people sort of think, well, if it's eligible, then I should have a go at it. I think that's one of those ones that's not going to appeal. Now, this one I get excited about. Does anyone know much about the Mirai? It's hydrogen powered, yeah. So it's
Can I jump in there?
Sure.
I drive a Camry hybrid. It's 8 years old, and I asked CMI Christmas before last, what are Toyota doing about electric vehicles?
Yeah.
And I said, no, not in Australia. Toyota have an advert on the telly at the moment in which they have this is the one where the little girl says, are we there yet?
Yeah.
And there's a quick flash of Toyota fuel cell. Now, I did a search and found that this is selling at the moment in California, and it's a hydrogen-powered car.
Yeah.
So that's all I know, but this says that Toyota are doing electric vehicles, but they're not doing battery-powered ones.
No. Well, electric.
They're going down a different path for some reason.
I think they're sticking with hybrid for a bit longer.
Yeah.
But
Hybrid, yeah. But
yeah.
They're
sort of selling.
They're doing the fuel cell is the way they're going.
Yeah.
They're doing hydrogen power.
So they're not. I think they're. I think they will.
As I understood it, they are selling these in California.
Yeah.
There's a few of them driving around there.
So there are a fair few of them driving around in Japan too.
Oh yeah.
We've done one. I've sold one of these to a guy in Sydney. But so if you want to be particularly adventurous and you have access to a hydrogen refilling station, of which there are a couple in that. Don't laugh. There are a couple in Australia, in Adelaide. But you'd have to make good friends with the people that sell it. But I don't know. You'd probably be the only one in Adelaide aside from experimental vehicles that were doing it. But there is one down at the old Mitsubishi plant, Tonsley. That's the one. Yeah, there is one down there. So if you're really keen, you can we can set you up with a price on that. I will add actually on this, Toyota is planning to bring out the next generation Mirai, and it's a much, in my opinion, I mean, looks are subjective, but it's a much nicer looking car. The new one's a very nice looking car, but it is still hydrogen. You still have to fill it up at Tonsley. So. But these are obviously a lot cheaper. The new ones are going to be quite expensive. They're moving it up market. So if that's if hydrogen is is your bag, we can fulfil that need. And I was very excited to put that on the list. I should mention in all this, I've been quite involved with putting the cars on the list in the first place. So, and that comes down to knowing understanding the rules inside and out, knowing and I'll tell you some of the more interesting discussions I've had back and forth with the department over what's eligible and what's not in a minute. So the Mirai's on. That's quite cool.
How far would the Mirai go with a full hydrogen tank?
They go with a full tank. I think they're pretty similar to a normal petrol powered vehicle. So I think they're sort of 500-ish range. Yeah. So I know the new ones are better again. They'll go quite a long way, 600 plus. So,
And what, do you get water dripping out
yeah.
somewhere?
So you have water, yeah, it just has steam coming out the back.
Okay.
So, yeah, which is pretty cool. But so someone's added the BMW on. I'm not sure about that. That's a fresh one. So I wasn't involved in that. But a lot of this is about tapping niches. So I think BMW actually sell the 530e here, but they don't sell it in all-wheel drive. So this is a combination of all-wheel drive and hybrid. So again, we're just sort of, we're still learning the ropes on what's eligible and what's not, what fits. You know, and even finding, you can imagine, I think there's something like 610 makes and models available in, models available in Australia just on the new car market. So finding which ones are available and which ones aren't, which variants fit and which ones don't, is quite a challenge. So that's the X-Drive. That's a real photo from the workshop. So that's a Subaru XV. And again, they do a hybrid, and they've actually just released that here in Australia. But we can do the earlier models. They were out for a few years in Japan before they came out here. So good chance we can do those at quite a deal cheaper than the new ones. Honda Fit Hybrid is another one. There are millions of them in Japan. The only question is how we get them over here at a price that's cheap, because obviously the Fit is known here as the Jazz, right? So the Honda Jazz, but they're sort of a $15,000 range, $15,000 to $20,000 range, and so getting that over here and paying shipping and all the taxes and everything is a bit of a challenge. But a lot of these things, cars that we're putting on are actually planning for the future, because the depreciation rate overseas is much faster than Australia. So we do this knowing that in the future the arbitrage will get better. So it's worth something to think about. This is actually a photo of a customer's car. So the Lexus actually did a hybrid vehicle, a specialist hybrid vehicle called the HS, and that it's the same running gear as Prius. No, it's not the Prius. Same running gear as a hybrid Corolla. So, but in a much nicer package, obviously. So this was a customer's car. That was about 17,000, I think. Yeah. The equivalent, the matching Toyota that goes with that is called the Toyota Sai, and that's a slightly newer version. But those two are one's the Toyota, one's the Lexus. They sort of slightly different badging and styling and luxury. Now we get into some of the new ones that have just come onto the list, and I thought this is sort of future planning for you. Peugeot do an E208. It's just come out, it'll be at least within the last 3 months, because that's the gap we have to allow before we can apply. But that's an all-electric vehicle that Peugeot's released. And those will come onto the market. Again, at the moment, unless you wanted to be an early adopter and you were prepared to pay a premium for that and be the first one to have one in Australia, those will start to make more sense in a few years' time, when we can we can do, as they come down, we can buy cars that are 2 or 3 years old out of the UK, and then they'll make a bit more sense financially. But we do occasionally, we get inquiries from people who just say, I want to buy a brand new car, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute, just to be the first. So the Fiat now do a 500 electric. So that's another fairly recent release. So those are coming onto the market, and very similar. That we're hoping that those will come in at price points eventually, not at the moment because they're still new. But a lot of these cars, you can see where we're sort of aiming in a few years' time is that you get these cars in at sub 20,000. I mean, sub 20,000 is, for an electric car, is your ideal spot. If we can get them in, you can see how the numbers are going to grow quite rapidly, if we're at that price point rather than 40,000, 50,000, which all the new cars are at the moment. This is another hybrid that's just been released, Toyota Corolla hybrid. Not a bad looking wagon, but yeah, hybrid setup. Now the Honda E, I don't know if any of you have looked at or lusted after the Honda E. They are a very cute car. The only problem is that they are very expensive, A, and B, their range isn't overly great. But they look good while they're doing it. So I think it's sort of form over function a bit, but they are cute. And so they're a bit expensive, and same sort of deal because they're brand new. You could buy one now theoretically if you wanted to, but it will just be expensive. Now, and Honda loves to change their names for the cars in Japan. This is a Honda City sedan, and again in Japan it's a bit like the Jazz, but it's sort of a sedan version. But that's now on as well. If you've been following Volkswagen, they've just started releasing their electric range, and the ID3 is already on for import. Again, you would have to pay a premium if you wanted to be the first, but in a few years' time, the prices will come down, and we'll be able to pick up new ones of those out of the UK for much cheaper than, and possibly Japan. Actually, I suspect they'll hit Japan a lot sooner than they hit Australia. Okay, so I've got a story for you. I'm a little bit grumpy about the Audi e-tron. It hurts me every time I see one. Well, I don't see one because they still haven't made it onto the market yet. The rules state that when you apply for a car, it can't be sold here by the manufacturer. But if the manufacturer chooses not to release the car in Australia, we can then effectively gazump them and put it on the list. Once it's on the list, it stays there for 3 years. Right? So, but how they determine when the rules state that the car has to be made genuinely available to the public in Australia. Now, at the moment, there is a bit of, and this was our recent, I said to you I went to Canberra a couple of weeks ago, this was the conversation that was had about what is the definition of genuinely available to the public. Because I put in the application for the e-tron, knowing that Audi hadn't released it yet, and they said no, Audi have said that they're going to bring it here, and there's it's what's called a full volume approval that they had done, but that's a rubber stamping process. The cars weren't available to the public, and I said, well, hang on, that's not genuinely available. Going through the paperwork does not mean that the car's available. That has now been sitting in limbo for about 12 months. 12 months as of next month. So it's been a bit of to and fro, and I suspect it may end up in court. And I deliberately did the e-tron application because I knew I knew what was around the corner soon after that, which was this car. So, and again, we knew that the Taycan, I think it's called, pronounced correctly. I say Taycan. To me, it looks like Taycan. I'll say Taycan. So, and the same problem. So we know that while Porsche did the application for this mid last year, the cars weren't released until February the 28th. They did you would have seen them now out they're all up on Glen Osmond Road. If you go past the dealership up there, you'll see there are Taycans up in there. So our argument now is that we can actually apply for all the build months that were before February, because they came out in February this year. We should be able to apply for all the build months for the year, the months before they were sold here. The government disagrees, and this is where we're having a bit of, a disagreement about what's genuinely available. But you can imagine the appeal for an enthusiast if at 3 years old we can import one out of the UK rather than getting one here at a much discounted rate compared to what's available here. So this is all part of the exciting life of being part of AEVA, the association that I'm with, and going back and forth and speaking to politicians. But also you've got on the other side, you've got the new car dealers and the new car manufacturers who want to lock us out altogether. All right, so and pushing back very hard. So that's yeah. So the take-ins on it. That will be on the list shortly, and I would just do that just to give them grey hairs in Canberra, just to see what they do. Okay, so I've got that's close to the end of what I was going to talk about. Again, I'll just reiterate that the process that I have is it's what I call low risk, low return. My business. So I'm not a dealer, I don't make a lot of money, but I also don't carry stock. And so I don't have to, you know, for my customers, they're not paying for the rent on an expensive yard. They're not paying for all the other, you know, lights to be on. I effectively work from home. But it does mean that the prices and the quality of cars that we can bring in is much. You'll get a much better car for your money. You can look at it one way or the other. You can either say, well, we get the cars cheaper, or you can look at it as, okay, if you want to spend $20,000 on a car, the car that you buy will be a much nicer one than if you go to a dealer, because our margins are much smaller. So that being said, I've put my email address up there. I've also got cards there if anyone wants to take a business card. If you want to get in touch with me, that's fine. Now, there was some discussion about a group buy, and I know that there has been some talk about group buys and the appeal of a group buy. Just so you understand, our fee, so if you come and import a car through Iron Chef, it's $1,100 flat fee. So you just pay your $1,100. That includes having people check the car in Japan. You know, we arrange everything right through to your door, and you just pay the bills as they come in. That's pretty much how it works. So initially you pay for the car. When the car arrives in Australia, you pay for your taxes and your shipping, and then when it's finished in compliance, you pay for the compliance cost to the workshop. All these are paid direct to the suppliers. Now, I'm making this sound very simple, and you're probably thinking, oh, well, I could do this myself. But I can tell you, if it was easy, I wouldn't have a job, because everyone would be doing it themselves, and I'd just be able to sit. You know, I'd go and sit on an island somewhere and probably have more hair than I do now. But yeah, so we do work on. This is more just for your information. When we have repeat customers, and we have a lot of repeat customers, our customers are quite loyal. We do after the third car. After the first one, we charge $880. So we have it's an $880 broker fee, and then from there it goes. If we've got regular customers, it goes down to $660. I am happy to offer, if you are considering buying something and you want to get together, I will give you a reduction on the on my broker fee, just because I'm keen to support, particularly keen to support AEVA, but also to support the growing the numbers of electric vehicles in Australia. I think it's something that's long overdue, and neither the government or the manufacturers are overly. They're quite happy with the status quo. Manufacturers like internal combustion engine vehicles because they get more servicing money out of it, and there's just been a lot of government inaction, which has been a sort of a continual source of frustration for us. But the interesting thing is that this, almost by accident, the changes to the importing regulations are going to inadvertently increase the numbers of new cars as well, because you can imagine that the only way to stop, say for example, I'm trying to think of a car, so the Porsche Taycan. If Porsche opted not to do that, then we would have open slather. We could bring in as many as we liked. And so the only way that the manufacturers can stop us from importing the cars outside of their network is to bring them in themselves, right? So, yeah, Mike.
Is Porsche offering the long-range and short-range battery pack for the rear-wheel drive and the four-wheel drive versions in Australia? Can you get them because of that? I mean, Porsche International have already released at least 4 versions of the car. And are they all available for sale in Australia now?
I would have to do a bit more digging on that. I know that they've got the turbo. Don't get me started on them calling it a turbo, but Yeah.
2 models on car sales on it this afternoon.
Yeah. So I'd have to check on that. But if put it this way, if the all-wheel drive model's not sold here, we'd be able to get it on.
Now that one will be because it was the first version.
Okay.
Rear-wheel drive
So
is launched.
okay. So if the rear-wheel drive, if the drive configuration is different, we'd be able to get it on. And also, if the range, I think it's 20%. If there's a difference of 20% in the range between long range and short, we'd be able to get that on as well if it's not sold here. That's how we got the E Plus on. So the Leaf. So the Leaf was the normal Leaf is the E Plus isn't sold here, but the E Plus has a much longer range. So that's how we're able to get it on. All right. Yeah, so inadvertently the government has created us an environment where, pardon the pun, an environment where the manufacturers are sort of accidentally being held to account, because if they don't bring in these cars, then we will bring them in for them. So I always smile when manufacturers say, "Oh, we're not going to send this car to Australia," and I go, "Thanks very much," because it means that it's another opportunity for us. And again, this is all about growing the overall numbers. Did you want? Oh yeah. Oh, when the time comes, I will. Yeah. So I just mentioned about that. I just mentioned about that broker fee. So if you are keen, let me know, and if there's a few people, then we'll get together and I'll give you a discount on the fee. All right. Quickly before I go to Paul, because Paul can tell you about his experience and what it's like to actually go through the process. It's worth actually noting that Paul went through his importing process at quite a difficult time. There were a number of challenges. A, we were flat out. B, Troy, my staff member over in Japan, had switched roles, and then C, we had lots of problems with shipping and all sorts of challenges last year. Containers, as anyone that deals in containers will know that it's been a bit of a nightmare lately.
Just on pricing.
Yep.
You anecdotally mentioned the price for this vehicle, that vehicle, as you spoke in
Yep.
the presentation. And then you've broken down the components, your brokerage and then the other components. Those prices that you pinpointed there, were they all in
Yeah.
plus brokerage?
Yeah. So we.
Plus brokerage on top?
Yeah. No. Including.
All in?
Yeah, all in. So everything apart from registration. So just so you understand, Paul's going to tell you. So we have what's called a landed and complied price. So in other words, the cost of the car, our fee, shipping, taxes, compliance, all bundled in, because that makes the most sense for people to talk in that realm, because then the only cost you've got on top of that is registration. Aside from that, everything's in. So we don't. It's the most consistent price point. So if you change your budget, it doesn't matter too much. We can just work backwards. So you can imagine if someone gives us a $20,000 budget, what we do is we work backwards. We've got a calculator that reverse calculates everything. And we'll say, okay, for a $20,000 budget, you can spend, 900,000 yen in Japan on a car. Right, so that's it. We just work the budget back from there, because we know that by the time it reaches here, that's what it'll be in total. Right, Paul can give you a breakdown.
And the stamp duty.
Stamp duty. That on local stamp duty, that's not included. So the only thing we don't include is the registration costs, and that would be the same as if you bought any other car. So if you buy a car locally, a second-hand car locally, you'll pay stamp duty on it anyway. So that's all. And part of the reason we don't do that is because it's different from state to state, and it's very hard. The calculator's not quite that clever. So we're certainly talking landed and complied. That's cars ready to go, ready to be registered, and away you go. All right. So I'll hand over to Paul, and feel free to pummel him with questions, because and he can tell you about his experience. It is quite an adventure. It's just going through the whole journey is a little bit of fun. You do have to be patient. That's the only thing. But he can tell you about that.
Yep. The main thing is you have to be patient, and you have to be, and also quite nimble, because you haven't got a lot of time between the time that they find a car to when you say yes, you want to buy it. So what you do, what we did a lot of research, and we decided that we wanted a Nissan Leaf. We decided we wanted it to be a 2016. We wanted it to be 30 kilowatts. I went to a lot of sites, a lot of other sites, and looked at the prices. And there's one site in Melbourne that will actually give you a breakdown of the current of all the vehicles that they've sold. They're an importer as well. I won't say the name, but anyway, they're an importer as well, and they actually give you all the prices and all the details of the vehicles. So I could work out exactly what the going price was, the landed and complied price of what I wanted. And that included the mileage, the state of health of the battery, the colour, the range, everything. So I could compare that. So I had that figure, and then I looked at dealers around Australia and looked at it, and they were offering for the same the same configuration, it was about $27,000. So okay, well, that's $27,000. So I looked at some importers in Victoria, but there was an issue about the car being landed in Victoria, then get complied in Victoria and carry on there, being transported to South Australia. So I thought, well, I'll go for South Australian importer. Went to the AEVA website, looked at the presentation that Kristian had last year. Yes, that's fine. So we did a lot of research. So it's not something we went into half-heartedly. So we signed, yes, we'll do it. We paid our $1,100. We had to fill out a form that looked at the make, the year, the battery health, the size of the battery, the range we wanted, the rating. So each car has a rating between 1 and 5. So you say the rating, and then the colour. And now white is the most popular. Well, so if you want a white one, it's going to be more expensive. We then said, we're willing to pay, complied, landed in our driveway, $21,000. So we gave that figure to Kristian. We said, yep, go for it. You find a vehicle, and we're happy to pay $21,000, landed in our driveway. So anyway, Troy went around, found a vehicle. The first one, we said yes, but that went. We couldn't get that one. The second one, the state of health of the battery wasn't quite right. Some of the cells, because you get a readout of the battery health. Some of the cells were down. No, thank you. The third one, it came up. We said yes, and what we found, you've got to be fairly quick because it was going to auction. So when it came in, I looked at it, spoke to Margaret, yes, we'll go for it. Troy, yes, we'll go for it. That afternoon, we got a text saying we got the car. We then had to pay for the car, so Margaret transferred the money. So that was $11,600. And there was a bit of exchange fee as well. So then we paid for the car. We then owned the car. They then arranged for the freight, and the customs. So that was $3,600. We paid that when it arrived in Australia. Then it eventually came to Adelaide. Then the compliance people picked it up. Did all their stuff, and that was another $2,400. So at the end of the day, we paid $18,895 to get the car complied in our driveway. Oh, sorry, what registration? That's added extra, but all we had to pay was that. So we saved about $8,000 doing that ourselves.
How old was the car?
2016, and it only had done 30,000 kilometres. The state of health was 87%, the state of health of the battery, and still got its 12 bars. When we charge it up to 100%, it's between 100, the range is between 170 to 190 Ks. Like today I charged up, went up to 190 Ks for full charge. It's like a new car. It's absolutely incredible. It is unbelievable. For what the price that we paid and what we got, it's like a new car. It's just great. But you do have to be patient, and you've got to be quite nimble. You have to be. It's a bit of fiddling around, and you've got to be happy with being able to transfer money overseas and pay bills and be happy and fill out forms and do all the work. So it's a bit of fiddling around, but if you're happy to do that, I reckon there's a really big saving. And for under $20,000 for what we got, I reckon it's good value, really good value. Yes, that's it.
The dash is all...
Oh, I see it. Yeah, no, the dash. Actually, the dash is interesting. It's all in Japanese, and you can work it out. We've worked it all out, most of it. But what you have to do is take the dash out and send it off to Melbourne, and that's around about $500. And they'll rejig the head unit, send it back, and you put it back in again. and the navigation, everything else is in English and Australian maps. The only problem I've got is that all the maps, all the maps are in Japanese, and the time is set on a Japanese time, so I can't adjust the time. That's really the only thing. But I've downloaded a manual for it, and I've worked out all the bits and pieces. And because we've driven electric cars, we know what we're looking for and we know what's going on. But that's really the only problem. But the radios works, and that's the main thing. Yeah. Sally, yep.
Real world range, so that 170 to 190, that's you.
Yeah. Real world range. It is about 175 to 180 around town, probably about 140 in the country. Yeah, real range. Yeah, from a 30 kilowatt pack. Interesting, we've got an Ioniq, a Hyundai Ioniq. It's got a 20 kilowatt pack, and its range is 270. This one's 170, and it's a bigger battery. It just shows you the difference in the Ioniq is a newer model, and it's more aerodynamic. But the Leaf is much better. I reckon it's much better for driving in town because it's got you're sitting up higher. It's quite nippy, and it's got a shorter wheelbase, so you can sort of drive around. So I drive that, and Margaret drives the Ioniq now, which is good. Yeah, and we sold our petrol car last weekend, so we're petrol free. So the aim was to get rid of our petrol car. So we bought the Leaf as a second car. That's why it's only a 30 kilowatt battery. We use the Ioniq for our trips because it's a better car for tripping, going on trips, and going on trips. Yeah, it's just a bigger car, and it's much more comfortable for trips. And we'll just use the Leaf for a second car around town. Any other questions? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Yep.
Are you going to be able to have a problem with servicing if you have to take it to a local service while they find it car?
The servicing, I'm on a forum, and we talk about that a fair bit, and most people say that dealers are happy, but I don't expect a lot of trouble with it. You know, people have had these cars for a lot of years and haven't put a spanner to them. So that was one of the reasons. Another reason, because we've owned electric cars for all these years, we understand about the maintenance and the reliability. So we're happy to buy an import without that guarantee, because I looked at the guarantee that some of that the dealers were providing, and they weren't. I don't think they were of any value for an electric car. They were funny. They were a drivetrain warranty, which didn't seem anything to me. And there was a limited battery warranty for 6 months. I thought, well, if the battery fails, well, Anyway, yeah. But it was good. So that's our little import things, all in Japanese. Interestingly, they sent us just out of the blue. We got a package, and all these things turned up. All the the owner's stuff, and the manual. And the manual's in Japanese, unfortunately, but you can read the icons. And I've downloaded a manual in English, and I'm just work through it and compare it, and you work through it. Yeah. But anyway, if anyone wants to come and look at it, yep, Dennis. I don't. The software upgrades, I'm not sure. I don't think so. I'm not sure. I'll have to work it out later on. Yep. But as I said, I'm on a forum for Leaf owners, and all that stuff just comes through. So it's pretty good. Yep.
So on that point, is that car connected?
Is the car connected? No, it's not. I haven't connected it. There's actually a little card in here that says I could, but because the navigation system is in Japanese, and when I turn the vehicle on, all the maps are in Japan. So you look like you're driving in Japan. So, yeah.
So when you say you've got the option to connect it,
No, so I'm not sure whether I have. I've got the card here. There's a little card that they sent to me, but that would probably be only applicable in Japan, I assume. I haven't really followed that through.
so the Australian ones that are sold here,
I'm not sure whether they're connected or not. I haven't gone into that. Yeah. Back to base. But anyway, it was a great experience. Just if you want to do it, you have to be a little bit patient and be happy to, fiddle around a bit, sending money around here and there, and trust the internet that it's going to go to the right spot.
So on that issue of money,
Yes.
you're not sending to Kristian to a single point.
No. So the payment is we paid directly to the auction house, and we bought the car. Then we paid directly to the car carrier and the guy that did the customs.
Provides that information.
Yeah, it's all that's all laid out, and the bills just come and you pay them.
It was
Yeah, it's 3 or 4 things you need to do, and that's it. But you just pay it as you go along. So, as Kristian was saying, you're not paying an office or anything. You're getting the savings. And the great thing is, I've actually got someone else has paid the depreciation on that vehicle for me, so that's even better. Because they have. Yeah, it's
I'm
great fun.
surprised that the compliance people allowed you to have a manual that was in Japanese.
No, was somebody sent it to me, someone from Japan, obviously
So
the
they
option is,
didn't want to see a manual in the car in English.
no.
Because can you address that, Kristian? Is
Yeah.
that possible?
Yep. Yeah, you did it. Oops.
I will say on that they are expected to, so that should have. But the other point I'll make is that the manuals that they translate are not your full. So they're sort of a basic, how do you survive?
Yeah, there was a little manual in the car.
It's a very thin one.
Yeah, there was a very thin one in the car. Yep.
Yeah, so they are expected to provide that as part of the compliance process. Just to answer your question before about some of those, with dealerships and support and that sort of stuff, bear in mind that New Zealand has an open slather approach to importing. And so, for example, there is quite an extensive group of leaf enthusiasts. In fact, leafs, I never know whether to say leafs or leaves, but they are a very strong selling. I think they sold 9,000 of them last year in New Zealand. They sell like hotcakes over there. But it also means that there's quite a strong enthusiast support. And so it was interesting to hear Paul mention about the forum, because a lot of those questions are actually answered by other enthusiasts rather than by the dealers. The dealers can choose whether or not they service your car. Most will do it fairly quietly because they don't want to upset the manufacturer, because the manufacturers get a bit sooky about them. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Any more questions?
Oh,
Dennis?
actually, while you,
Yeah.
okay. The compliance people,
Yeah.
do any of them provide after-sales services?
A lot of them do, particularly because a lot of them are actually dealers. So a lot of them will have compliance and dealership in the one spot. And I think, to be honest, the way that the new system is set up, that will be more common, because.
And a Nissan dealer is doing the compliance.
Oh no! They will never do it. The manufacturers don't want people using a system that's outside of their processes, because they don't make the money. So it'd be third-party compliance workshops, and they'll provide the support there as well. So that was now one last thing I'll show you before. One last thing before I hand back over. I'm showing you this first because this is COVID last year. Kind of like I said to you, I've been extremely busy, but I did set myself a target date of today to have this done. At least I've got a logo, but I can show you this. I have got another sub-brand that I'm about to open called eGarage. And eGarage will be the brand that's devoted purely to hybrid and EV.
To be consistent with all your other
Yes, no, it's not iron. It's nothing to do with iron, unfortunately. So, but yeah, you can see it's a leaf. It's supposed to be a leaf, if that looks like a leaf. It's probably hoping I don't have to explain it to you. But now that I have, I feel like I shouldn't have. But it is a bit of a Toyota. It's a bit of a Toyota. Oh, don't say that now. I'm going to. They probably don't put this up online. It's going to be Toyota's going to sue me for copyright or something. But yeah, so there will be a sub brand that basically does exactly the same as what Iron Chef Imports does now, but just purely devoted to hybrids and EVs. And there's another separate site for fleet as well, because we're finding we're getting some interest in that area from fleet. So the idea is that we pick up a lot of new stuff, and we can do a lot more volume in that space. So yeah, exciting times. This is what we've got to come. In the meantime, you can use my Auto Services Group, which is the parent company. You can use my Auto Services Group address. Feel free to take a card. It's just there on the table there. Yeah, that's about it.
So one
Yep.
final question, if
Go.
I may. Given that there's a single pipeline from Southeast Asia into our streets, as it were,
Yep.
and that would be chock-a block full, do you find difficulty sometimes getting a spare hole to put a car in?
Yes. So at the moment, everything is running. The boats are all full. The only good thing is that the boats run so regularly that it's usually not an issue. So what happens is that if you get bumped from one vessel to the next, which is what we've had a few times where customers' cars have, sorry, the vessel's full, you have to go to the next one. It's usually only a week or two. It's not a,
How long before you do it your own boat?
well, if I'm earning enough to be able to buy a boat, that would be, filling a boat. The boats are pretty large. 4,000 or 5,000 at a shot. So yeah, not quite there, but that's all right. If I'm there, I'll be well and truly retired and letting someone else do it, I reckon. Sorry. Any cars? Touch wood, never. And I've been doing it for 22 years. So I will say, just for your own peace of mind, the cars are all insured. So that for what's called total loss. So in other words, if the boat goes down, you're not having to pay to retrieve the car off the bottom of the ocean. And that was actually the first year I was working, which was 1999. They had a vessel go down between Europe and the UK, a car vessel, and it had come from Japan, and everyone was madly scrambling because who had insurance, who didn't have insurance. And I think there was sort of a class that they had to take a class action out there was negligence on the behalf of the shipping line. So it ended up being quite a drawn out process. But the people who had insurance could just walk away, they got their insurance and away they went. So what happens now is that all the shipping lines that come to Australia provide that insurance as part of the process. So it's all included in. You don't have to worry about that. It's a lot less headaches. Yep.
All right.
Last one, sorry.
Can you import damaged wrecked vehicles?
We can, but they have to be cut up to a certain level to be considered. Otherwise, you have to have an import approval, and that goes all through all that other process.
Basically,
You can,
you can import something you could gut,
Yeah.
build your own vehicle.
theoretically, yeah, but you'd have to say there's a certain level of dismantling it has to go through before it's allowed. Yeah. All right. If you got any other questions, feel free. I'll be here a bit for a bit. So
Exactly.
and
So
right.
that's been a pretty
Sorry?
fascinating journey through that.
No worries.
So please join me in thanking Kristian.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.